All shades of confusion, silence, tenderness, and the kind of choices you only understand once you've felt what it means to be forgotten. This isn't the kind of story people talk about openly. But it's real, it's messy, and it changed everything. So before we dive in, subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold. Because some stories are too tangled for silence, and the next one might just echo your own. I was 43, and I felt old. Not in years, but in spirit. Like I'd lived 10 lives, all in silence. Like something inside me had been slowly fading, and no one had noticed. My husband, well, he wasn't cruel. But he wasn't present either. He married me 2 years after his first wife passed away. And sometimes, I wondered if he ever really saw me, or if I was just filling space that used to belong to someone else. He worked long hours. He talked more to his clients than to me. And when he came home, he'd give me a nod, maybe a distracted kiss on the cheek, and then disappear into his office or behind the screen of a muted television. Our house felt like a museum. Clean. Cold. Still holding onto the scent of a woman I'd never met but could never compete with. Pictures of her still hung on the walls. He said they were for Eli. But I knew better. Some memories are kept alive not for the children, but for the grieving. And I was just trying not to take up too much space in the hallways she once walked. Eli was 19. Quiet. Watchful. Not the kind of kid who talked back or slammed doors. He had his mother's eyes, at least that's what people always said. He was respectful, polite, careful with his words. And somehow, over time, he became the only person in that house who spoke to me like I mattered. It started small. After dinner, when I was scrubbing dishes alone, he'd dry them. He never said much, but when he did, it was never empty talk. He asked if I was tired. He thanked me for dinner. The first time he said thank you, I nearly cried. It had been so long since anyone in that house acknowledged me without needing something in return. He noticed things. When I wore my hair differently. When I changed the throw pillows in the living room. When I bought a new candle and lit it during dinner. Things my husband never once mentioned. There were moments, soft ones, that started slipping into our routine. He'd linger a little longer at the table. Ask me questions no one else cared to ask, how my day was, what book I was reading, if I missed my family. Sometimes, he'd say something that made me laugh. And the way he looked at me when I did, it wasn't inappropriate. But it wasn't indifferent either. It felt seen. Like he enjoyed being the reason I smiled. One night, I made lasagna. I remember because it was my mother's recipe and it had taken hours. My husband came home late, ate 2 bites, and left the rest untouched. Eli stayed behind. Had seconds. Then thirds. Said it was the best thing he'd eaten all week. When I started clearing the table, he stood beside me, towel in hand. We didn't talk much, just the sound of water, dishes, and quiet breathing. And then he said, "You don't have to do everything alone, you know." It was such a simple thing. But it stayed with me. Because that's how I felt in that house. Alone. Like an unpaid housekeeper in someone else's memory. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me. Not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but in a way that made me feel present. Like he was studying something fragile. There were glances. Too long to be casual. Too short to be called anything else. But I noticed them, and I think he knew I did. There was one night, I'll never forget it. I made a joke. Something light. Sarcastic. And he laughed, really laughed. Then said, "You're funny. Most people don't know that about you." And just like that, I realized he was paying attention to the parts of me I thought had disappeared. That's when things started to shift. Not with words, but in the silence. In the way he stayed behind just a little longer. In the way he passed me a cup of tea without asking how I liked it, and got it just right. In the way my name sounded softer when he said it. It wasn't a relationship. It wasn't a secret. It was something else. Something unspoken. Something I didn't understand yet. Something that, if I'm being honest, I didn't want to look at too closely, but it was there, growing quietly in the spaces between our footsteps. And I think, deep down, I already knew something was going to happen. I just didn't know when, or what it would cost. It was a Thursday. Nothing special. Just another quiet, gray afternoon in a house that had long forgotten how to hold warmth. I had just finished arguing with my husband. Well, if you could even call it an argument. It was more like silence disguised as conversation. I had asked him if he was coming home early that weekend. He sighed, said I was always needing something. Then he walked out the door before I could even respond. That's what our marriage had become, me asking, him resenting. Me reaching, him retreating. I stood in the kitchen, hands still damp from washing the breakfast dishes. The tears came before I even noticed them. Not the loud kind, just quiet drops sliding down my cheeks, like my body had grown tired of holding it all in. I wasn't sobbing. I wasn't falling apart. I was just breaking slowly in silence. The kind of break that doesn't shatter, it just dissolves. I thought I was alone, but then I heard footsteps. Slow, careful, and then Eli was standing in the doorway. I didn't look up at first. Didn't want him to see me like that. Didn't want to explain. Didn't want to feel embarrassed. But he didn't ask any questions. He didn't clear his throat or make some excuse to leave. He walked across the room, and without saying a single word, he wrapped his arms around me. And it wasn't a quick, polite hug. It wasn't one of those awkward family gestures people do out of obligation. It was slow, warm, steady. His arms circled my shoulders like he knew exactly how much weight I'd been carrying. His hand settled on my back, and he just held me. I froze. Because it had been so long since anyone had touched me with that kind of care. Not lust, not duty, just presence. His chest against mine, his breath close to my ear, the smell of soap and faint traces of cologne. I felt my body tense and then slowly give in, not because I wanted anything more, but because I had forgotten what it felt like to be held without needing to ask for it. He whispered, soft enough I almost didn't hear it, "You don't deserve this." That's all he said. And then he let go and walked away. Just like that. No questions. No explanations. Just those words, and the ghost of his arms still wrapped around me. I stood there for a long time, staring at the window above the sink, blinking away tears I hadn't even noticed were still falling. You don't deserve this. The sentence echoed in my chest. Not because it was shocking, but because no one had ever said that to me before. I replayed that moment 100 times in my head that night. The way his voice sounded like he meant it. The way his touch felt like he wasn't just hugging me, but holding something fragile. Me. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind refusing to rest. Was it kindness? Pity? Something else? And that's when it started, the shift. The way I suddenly noticed the sound of his footsteps on the stairs. The way my eyes followed him when he crossed the living room. The way I began to listen for his car in the driveway. The way I caught myself brushing my hair differently, just in case I ran into him before dinner. I didn't want it to mean anything, but it did, because in one moment, one quiet, unspoken moment, he saw me. He saw the part of me I didn't let anyone see. The tired, the hurting, the invisible. And I didn't know what to do with that. All I knew was, for the first time in years, I felt awake. And it scared me more than I could say. For days, I told myself it meant nothing. That hug, those words. It was just kindness. A boy, barely a man, comforting the woman who raised him like a mother. That's all it was. That's what I repeated in my head over and over. Like a prayer. Like a lie I needed to believe. He's just being kind. I'm just emotional. Everything feels heavier lately. And yet, something had changed. Not on the outside. Not where anyone could see. But inside me, something stirred that I hadn't felt in years. I started noticing things. The faint scent of his cologne lingering on the kitchen towel he used. How his shampoo clung to the hallway when he passed through after a shower. I noticed the way he glanced at me when he thought I wasn't looking. Not long enough to raise alarms, but long enough that it made my breath catch. Sometimes I caught him smiling, just a little, when I walked into the room, and I smiled back. Without meaning to. Without knowing why. And at night, my mind betrayed me. I dreamed of him. Not of anything happening. Just him sitting beside me, looking at me the way no one else did. His presence in those dreams made my skin feel too tight, my chest too full. I'd wake up with my heart racing, then lie in the dark, wondering what was happening to me. Wondering what kind of woman dreams of her stepson and can't tell anyone about it. I hated myself for it. I hated how I kept replaying that hug in my head. The way his arms felt, how they didn't want to let go. The way he whispered like he meant it, like he'd been carrying that thought for a while and finally couldn't hold it in. But I also felt something else. Alive. Awake. Wanted. And that made the shame even worse. Because I shouldn't need that kind of validation. Not from him. Not from anyone. I was supposed to be past that stage in life. The one where butterflies matter. The one where eye contact can ruin your day. But here I was, getting dressed a little slower. Putting on lipstick for no reason. Changing into a different top after dinner, just in case he noticed. And I began to keep things from my husband. Not lies. Just omissions. Moments I didn't mention. Conversations I left out. Glances I didn't explain. I didn't know what that made me. But I knew it wasn't innocent anymore. There was a moment, just a small one, when I passed by Eli in the hallway. He said, "You look nice today." Soft. So soft. Like it wasn't just about the outfit. And I felt heat rise to my cheeks. Laughed it off. But I carried that compliment for hours. Turned it over in my head like a secret treasure. I started setting the table differently. 2 candles instead of 1. Soft music during dinner. My husband didn't notice. But Eli did. He always noticed. And the more he noticed, the more I did too. The way he lingered after meals. The way his fingers brushed mine when he passed the salt. The way he sometimes leaned in just a bit too close when he spoke. I told myself I was imagining it. That I was assigning meaning to nothing. That I was lonely, and loneliness makes shadows feel like substance. But the feeling wouldn't go away. That quiet, aching warmth in my chest when he was near. That silence between us that didn't feel empty, it felt full of things we weren't saying. I should have pulled back. I should have created distance. But I didn't, because I liked feeling seen. I liked feeling wanted. Even if I didn't fully understand what that meant yet. Even if it was wrong. And deep down, beneath the guilt and confusion, beneath the long sighs and silent prayers for clarity, there was a tiny voice whispering the question I didn't want to ask myself. What if he feels it too? Eli started spending more time in the kitchen. It happened gradually. He'd wander in while I was cooking, lean against the counter, and just talk. Sometimes he'd ask if I needed help, sometimes he'd just stand there. Like he didn't want to be anywhere else. One evening, he offered to cook with me. Said he wanted to learn how I made my roasted chicken. He chopped onions while I seasoned the meat, and for the first time in a long while, the kitchen felt less like a duty and more like companionship. We talked about music, then about childhood. And eventually, he started sharing things I didn't expect. Stories about his mom, how she used to sing to him when he had nightmares, how she died suddenly, how after that no one really talked about her again. He told me he still dreams about her sometimes, and how it feels like waking up with an empty space beside him. I didn't speak, just listened, because I knew that kind of emptiness. There was something raw in his voice, vulnerable, like he was handing me the softest part of himself and hoping I wouldn't drop it. After dinner, we washed dishes together. Our arms kept brushing and neither of us stepped back. The silence between us had changed. It used to feel accidental. Now it felt deliberate. Charged. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, I walked past the dining room and saw his sketchbook left open on the table. I don't know what made me look. Maybe curiosity. Maybe something else. But what I saw stopped me cold. It was me. A pencil sketch. Soft lines. Detailed. Delicate. I was asleep on the couch. One arm tucked beneath my head, a blanket draped over me. The way he had drawn my face, gentle, peaceful. Like I was something worth remembering. I stared at it for a long time. Part of me frozen. Part of me aching. The next day, I asked him. I tried to keep my voice light as if I hadn't been thinking about it nonstop. He didn't flinch. Didn't look embarrassed. He just said, I draw what comforts me, and that was it. He walked away, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And I stood there, heart pounding, feeling something bloom inside me that I didn't know how to name. That evening, my husband came home early. I was in the kitchen, Eli nearby, helping me carry in groceries. Nothing was said. No gestures. No closeness. But still, the air felt different. My husband paused in the doorway, looked at us for a moment too long. Then he asked, "Everything all right?" And I smiled, nodded, said the only thing I could think of. Yeah, just tired. He watched me, as if trying to read something behind my eyes. Then he let it go. But something about the way he looked at me that night, I think he knew. Not the details. Not the truth. But something had shifted. Later that week, Eli and I ended up watching a movie together. It wasn't planned. It just happened. My husband had gone to bed early. I was about to turn off the TV when Eli walked in. He sat beside me. Not close, but not far, either. Halfway through the film, our knees touched. Just barely. A brush of skin. A quiet connection. I could have moved. Should have. But I didn't. And neither did he. I told myself it was nothing. But I felt it. All of it. The tension. The pull. The unspoken. We sat like that for the rest of the movie, knees touching, bodies still. When the credits rolled, I didn't even remember what we'd just watched. All I remembered was the heat where his leg met mine. I turned to look at him. He looked back. Neither of us said a word. And I thought to myself, this is the moment. This is where I pull away. But I didn't. I stayed. Because in that moment, I didn't want to be good. I didn't want to be wise. I just wanted to feel something that didn't hurt. Something that felt like being chosen. I should have moved away. But I didn't. I couldn't. It was raining that night. One of those long, heavy storms that wraps around the house like a blanket you didn't ask for. The kind that makes you feel small. Alone. My husband was out of town business trip. He'd left that morning without much more than a quick, "See you Monday." No kiss. No eye contact. Just the sound of his suitcase wheels dragging across the hallway tile. By the time the sun went down, the rain had turned into thunder. Wind pushed at the windows like it was trying to get in. And then, just like that, the power went out. No warning. Just darkness. Total and immediate. I lit a few candles. The warm glow flickered along the kitchen walls, soft and uneven. It felt like the whole house was holding its breath. I poured a glass of wine. Then another. I sat in silence and listened to the storm. And then, I heard footsteps. Eli. He came down slowly, cautiously, his shadow stretching across the wall before I even saw his face. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. But something in my chest broke a little more at the sound of his voice. He sat across from me. The candle between us threw soft light across his features. Everything about the moment felt suspended. Like time had stepped out of the room and left just the two of us behind. I offered him a glass of wine. He hesitated, then took it. We talked. Quiet, aimless conversation. Books. Music. How weird the house felt without power. Then it shifted. I don't even remember what triggered it. A sentence. A silence. Suddenly, I was talking. Really talking. I told him how lonely I felt. How small my world had become. How I sometimes stared out the kitchen window and wondered how I'd ended up here, in a marriage that felt more like a routine than a relationship. I told him about the days when no one asked how I was. About the nights when I cried into a pillow so no one could hear. About how I didn't recognize myself in the mirror anymore. I didn't mean to cry, but the tears came anyway, and I didn't try to stop them. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, embarrassed, suddenly aware of how raw I had let myself become. And that's when he reached for me. Not fast. Not bold. Just a quiet movement across the table. He reached out and touched my cheek gently, like he was afraid I'd flinch. I didn't. His thumb traced the tear that hadn't yet fallen. His eyes searched mine, slow, steady, and not innocent anymore. I should have pulled away, but I didn't. I leaned into the warmth of his hand, closed my eyes, and then he leaned in. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't messy. It was soft, tender, like both of us knew we were stepping off a ledge but couldn't bring ourselves to stop. And we kissed. Just once. But it wasn't small. It was full. Of every unsaid thing. Of every glance, every silence, every night spent wanting to be seen. His lips on mine felt like a question I didn't want the answer to, and I kissed him back. For a few seconds, the world didn't exist. No marriage. No title. No shame. Just two people in the dark wanting something real. And then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. We pulled back. He looked at me, not with regret, but with something deeper. Something sad. Neither of us spoke. He stood up. Walked away. And I sat there, candles flickering, heart pounding, mind racing. What had I just done? And yet, part of me wasn't sorry. But the next morning, everything changed. The next morning, everything was still. The storm had passed, but it left a strange silence in its wake, not peace, just absence. I came downstairs early, hoping to catch my breath before anyone else woke up. But Eli was already there, sitting at the table. A half-eaten piece of toast in front of him, his eyes fixed on something far away. I said good morning. He nodded. No smile. No warmth. Just a polite flicker of acknowledgement. We didn't make eye contact. And just like that, a wall rose between us, quiet and solid, built out of everything we hadn't said the night before. I busied myself in the kitchen, washed a clean dish, wiped the already dry counter. My hands moved like they were on autopilot, but my heart was caught in my throat. I wanted to speak, to ask him if he was okay, if we were okay, but I didn't know how to say it. I didn't know which version of myself would answer back if I did. By mid-afternoon, I heard the sound of zippers and drawers. I walked past his room and saw him folding shirts, packing up his things. Too early. He wasn't supposed to leave for another 2 weeks. But there he was, carefully closing his suitcase like someone who had made up his mind. I stood in the doorway, watched him quietly. Going somewhere? It was the only sentence I could find. He didn't look at me. Didn't stop packing. Yeah, he said. Decided I should head back early. Got stuff to take care of. His voice was calm, measured, but it felt like something final. I nodded, even though my chest was tightening. I see, I said. But I didn't. Not really. Because a part of me still wanted him to say something else, to look at me the way he had last night. To tell me it meant something. Anything. But he didn't. And I didn't ask. That evening, my husband came home. He dropped his keys on the table like always, kicked off his shoes, loosened his tie, then paused. He looked around. At me. At the dim hallway. At the half-empty glass of wine still sitting near the sink. Something feels off in this house, he said. I swallowed hard, forced a small laugh. Maybe it's just the weather, I offered. Storm threw everything off balance. He didn't look convinced. But he let it go. I carried on with dinner. Set the table, made conversation, played my part. But everything felt heavier. I saw myself in the mirror later that night while brushing my teeth, and for a moment, I didn't recognize the woman looking back. She looked older, tired, and yet, there was something else too. A flicker of something beneath the exhaustion. Not regret, not pride, just knowing that once a line is crossed, you never quite return to the version of yourself that stood on the other side. The next morning, Eli was gone. No goodbye, no note, just an empty room and a bed stripped bare. I stood in the doorway for a long time, looking at the space where he used to be, trying to convince myself that this was for the best, that this was the clean break. But all I felt was silence. Heavy, dense, final. I told myself to breathe, to move on. But my reflections still didn't look like me, and the house never quite felt the same again. The days that followed blurred together. Not because I was busy, but because I wasn't. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Like something had been cut out of it. Like air had stopped moving in certain corners. I found myself reaching for distractions, cleaning things that were already